I hired my wife after she was fired, then she applied for my dismissal. My name's Everett, 33 years old, and for the last 5 years, I've been working at a mid-sized technology company based in Portland, Oregon. I started off as a back-end developer, fresh off a burnout from my previous job in Chicago, and through a combination of persistence, trust building, and the occasional fortunate project placement, I climbed up to the position of principal systems architect. It's not a glamorous role in the way folks imagine tech jobs to be, no slides or beanbags, and the coffee machine has been malfunctioning for 3 years, but the work is honest, the pay is solid, and I genuinely like the people I worked with. A lot of them, like me, weren't chasing headlines or flashy startups. We were building systems that kept real things running, and I found a kind of quiet pride in that. About a year and a half ago, I met a woman named Margot at a local board game cafe during a friend's birthday gathering. Margot was 30, sharp-witted, confident, with the kind of personality that could light up an entire conversation without ever trying too hard. She worked in technology too, front-end design, she told me, at a small creative agency that built custom websites and interfaces for nonprofits. We hit it off faster than I expected. Within 2 months, we were seeing each other regularly. Within 5, she'd moved into my place, not because it was convenient, but because we both talked about a future together in ways that didn't feel rushed. We were two adults who had both made some mistakes in past relationships, who had done our time wandering in the modern dating wilderness, and it felt like us had a chance of being different. Around month 6, her agency hit financial trouble. They had overextended themselves chasing a new client vertical and couldn't cover their payroll. Margot came home one Friday afternoon looking like the life had been drained from her. She'd been laid off over a short video call, no warning, no severance. It rattled her deeply. She was always one to take pride in her independence and her ability to contribute. Watching her try to rebuild her confidence during the following weeks was difficult. She applied for jobs, lots of them. Sent cold emails, updated her portfolio, networked online. But the market had shifted. Roles that once got 30 applicants were now seeing over 300, and even though she was more than qualified for many of them, there were just too many variables she couldn't control. Then came what felt like a stroke of good fortune. A junior UI developer role opened up at my company on a separate team, unrelated to mine. It wasn't on par with the level she held before, but it was stable work at a well-respected company. I debated whether to suggest it to her. I'd always believed that it's best to keep your personal life and professional world separate, but Margot was struggling, and I genuinely respected her capabilities. I spoke with the hiring manager, Colleen, an old friend of mine from my second year there, and mentioned that Margot would be applying. I was careful. I didn't ask for special treatment. I made it clear that my recommendation was simply a flag that I believed she was worth looking at, nothing more. Margot handled the rest herself. She aced the skills evaluation, brought smart, strategic answers to the interviews, and 2 weeks later, she got the offer. We celebrated that night with takeout and bad reality TV, and for a moment, everything felt aligned. At work, we kept things professional. Different teams, different floor sections, and we didn't cross paths often. Margot made it clear from the start that she wanted no assumptions of favoritism, and to her credit, she worked even harder than most to prove she belonged on her own merit. She volunteered for extra work, stayed late when needed, and even started joining cross-functional design sprints that were outside her original responsibilities. About 6 weeks into her time there, I noticed subtle changes. Margot would stay later, often citing feedback loops or performance reviews. She became less interested in how my day went and more curious about the specifics of my projects, not in a supportive partner kind of way, but with a kind of focused intensity. She wanted to understand how different systems fit together, asked a lot about how decisions were made, who had influence, and what the promotion ladder really looked like. At the time, I chalked it up to ambition. We had always talked about building careers that mattered to us, and I took her curiosity as a sign that she was looking to grow. I didn't realize I was being studied. Then came the Monday morning I won't forget. I was asked to come into an unscheduled HR meeting with our department director and Colleen, who by then was no longer just the hiring manager, but also head of her entire division. The atmosphere in the room was stiff, controlled. I knew something was off before a single word was spoken. They told me a formal complaint had been submitted from a female employee, alleging that I had created a hostile work environment, leveraging my position of authority to pressure her into a personal relationship. The claim implied that she had felt her job might be in jeopardy if she didn't comply, and that she'd been emotionally manipulated through my influence within the company. I remember sitting there, breath catching in my throat, trying to piece together what they were telling me. I asked who had filed the complaint. They said they couldn't disclose that due to confidentiality, but I already knew. There was only one person who could have created that exact narrative. My mind spiraled. Had I said something wrong? Had I crossed a line without realizing it? But I had been vigilant about our boundaries at work. We didn't interact publicly in any way that could be misread. I never spoke about our relationship with colleagues, never used my position to influence her or her team. Despite my confusion and disbelief, the protocol was immediate and firm. I would be reassigned temporarily to work from home, away from direct managerial responsibilities, pending the outcome of an internal investigation. I left the building with a cardboard box of my belongings and a numbness I can't explain. That night, Margot came home like nothing had happened. She was unusually upbeat, talking about a recent brainstorm session with a few senior leads, mentioning how impressed one of them was with her design mock-ups. When she finally paused long enough for me to speak, I asked her quietly, "Did you submit a complaint to HR?" Her expression flickered, first surprise, then something that looked like defense, then something cold and unreadable. "What kind of question is that?" she asked. "Why would you accuse me of something like that?" I stared at her for a long moment. "Because I was removed from my role today pending an investigation into a harassment claim. And the details match our relationship." She stood still. Said nothing. And then she exhaled and looked away. "You know what? It doesn't matter now. What's done is done." I stood in the center of our apartment, unable to move, while Margot pulled leftovers from the fridge as if nothing unusual had happened. "You filed a complaint against me," I said again, softer this time, not because I wasn't certain anymore, but because saying it aloud felt surreal. She closed the fridge door. "You're overreacting, Everett." I could feel my hands curling into fists at my sides, not out of anger, but because I didn't know what else to do with the betrayal swelling up inside me. I had helped her through one of the lowest points in her life. I believed in her talent. I brought her into a space that mattered to me, a space I had worked for years to build credibility in. "Why?" I asked. "I gave you a reference. I supported you. And this is how you repay that." She paused, then walked slowly to the kitchen counter, leaning her weight against it. "I was never going to move up in that junior role," she said, staring not at me, but past me. "You know how it is. Promotion cycles, budget freezes, years of waiting. But you were already there." "So the answer," I said, stunned, "was to accuse me of misconduct?" She didn't flinch. "It's not personal. It was just strategic." Her tone was flat. Matter of fact. Like this was a business transaction and I was just a cost she had factored in. That was the moment I knew this wasn't someone I had misunderstood, this was someone who had calculated every step. "I want you out," I said. "Tonight if possible. Tomorrow at the latest." She crossed her arms. "My name is on the lease too." "Then I'll leave," I replied. "But we're done, Margot. Whatever this has been, it's over." She didn't argue. She grabbed some of her things, a few essentials, a weekend bag, a coat, and told me she'd return to collect the rest in a few days. Before walking out the door, she turned and said, "You could have helped me. You could have advocated for me. Maybe if you had, this wouldn't have been necessary." The door clicked shut behind her. I sank into the nearest chair, suddenly aware of how quiet the room had become. No hum of conversation, no sound of her music playing from the other room, no light footsteps moving from one space to another. Just silence and the weight of what I now knew. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed reviewing every conversation we'd ever had about work. I thought about the questions she'd asked, not out of romantic curiosity, but targeted inquiries about systems, workflows, people and leadership. I remembered a specific meeting I had invited her to watch remotely, just as a way of exposing her to how certain architectural decisions were made. At the time, I thought I was mentoring someone I cared about. Now I realized I had been giving her ammunition. But I'm not careless. One thing I've always done well, perhaps to the point of obsession, is document everything. It's just how I was trained in the early days of my career. Clear documentation, thorough communication, proper versioning. Not just in code, but in conversations, meetings, requests, and task handoffs. And so the next morning, I started pulling everything together. I didn't try to fight the investigation outright. I knew the company had to follow protocol, and I didn't want to give them any reason to think I was resisting their process. Instead, I sent a short, professional email to the HR director. "I understand the need for a thorough review of these claims. I will cooperate fully and provide any information you need to assess the situation. I remain confident in the truth of my conduct and the outcome of your process." Then I went to work. I constructed a complete timeline of my interactions with Margot at work. Every conversation we had in office spaces, every meeting we were both present for, always with other people around, always in professional settings. There was nothing remotely romantic or inappropriate in any of them. I gathered text messages and emails from before she even joined the company. Messages showing we were already living together, already in a committed relationship, long before she became an employee. I highlighted our move-in date, shared photos from trips and family events that placed us as a couple publicly well before any workplace overlap. I even found a few screenshots from early days of our relationship, when she sent me messages asking for advice on coding practices or industry tips long before she ever considered applying at my company. Then I found something more damning. During one of her first weeks at the company, Margot had asked if she could attend a product architecture Q&A I was holding for a group of new hires from another team. I had welcomed the idea, assuming she wanted to learn. I remembered that the session had been recorded, as most of ours are for documentation purposes. In the recording, she asked several detailed questions about deployment flow, permissions logic, and internal decision hierarchies. At the time, it seemed like healthy curiosity. Now, it was clearly information mining. But here's the key part: all of that was timestamped, stored on internal systems, and accessible by HR if requested. Nothing hidden. Nothing edited. No private channels. No messages outside approved platforms. What I didn't know, and what I would later learn, was that she had been selectively forwarding internal emails to her personal address, collecting documentation, diagrams, and correspondence that she didn't have authorized access to. While I worked quietly from home on a temporary assignment, I heard very little from the office. Colleen sent me occasional check-ins, always professional, but distant, as she had to remain neutral. A few co-workers texted generic encouragements. No one wanted to pick sides, and I didn't blame them. Margot, meanwhile, stayed silent. Until I saw her name on a company-wide email. She was listed as a temporary liaison for product design initiatives, a title that didn't exist before. It meant she was being brought into higher-level discussions, exactly the type I had once led. It was like watching someone move into your office while you stood outside in the rain. But I stayed calm. I kept my head down. And I waited. On a Thursday afternoon, exactly 12 days after I'd been removed, I received a calendar invite from HR. In person. 8:30 a.m. the next morning. I arrived early, dressed carefully, holding a folder of everything I had gathered. The room had a different energy this time. The HR director greeted me not with tension, but with a quiet nod. My department VP was there too, a man not easily moved, and for the first time in my career, I saw a flicker of apology in his expression. They explained that after a thorough review, they found no evidence of misconduct. In fact, the investigation had revealed significant indications that the report was filed not in good faith, but as part of a personal agenda. The internal audit had uncovered discrepancies, manipulated context, and even a draft folder containing practice versions of the harassment report with varying timelines and altered claims. I want to be clear, the VP said, this company takes all allegations seriously. But in this case, we also take truth seriously. You are being reinstated immediately. Full access, full responsibilities. And we will ensure that this does not impact your standing moving forward. I nodded once. That was all I could manage. As I left the room and logged back into my workstation, my inbox pinged with a notification. Organizational update, department realignments. My name was on it, back in my original position. Margot's name was nowhere to be found. The first thing I did when I sat down at my desk was breathe. Not shallow or nervous, but a deep breath, the kind that fills your chest and reaches your fingertips. I didn't realize how long I'd been holding tension in my body. 2 weeks may not seem long to some people, but when your character, your reputation, your livelihood is placed under a microscope with a false accusation behind it, time stretches in strange ways. Within the hour, I had my accounts fully restored, Slack messages flowing in, and team notifications acknowledging my reinstatement. Most of my coworkers didn't say much, just small greetings, nods, or brief messages like "glad to have you back." But underneath those words was something quieter, relief. Turns out, while I was away, things had not gone smoothly. During my forced absence, Margot had started pushing ideas during leadership meetings. At first, people assumed she had been tapped for her initiative. But gradually, it became clear that many of the ideas she presented weren't entirely her own. A few engineers noticed that some of her suggestions mirrored proposals I had outlined in prior roadmap documents only accessible to limited teams. When one of the senior architects flagged the similarity to a VP, that triggered a deeper review. It didn't take long for questions to surface. By mid-afternoon, I began hearing whispers. A friend from infrastructure quietly messaged me, "She showed up this morning, tried to badge and nothing worked. Heard they escorted her out." By 3 p.m., I had received 17 missed calls and a dozen text messages. All from Margot. The first few were short. "What did you do? They cut my access." Everett, what is going on? Then came the longer ones. You didn't have to take it this far. Can we please talk? There's more to explain. You don't understand why I did what I did. They continued into the night, confused, pleading, then accusatory. One message said I had twisted the narrative. Another claimed she only filed the report because she felt cornered. Then she shifted tone again and asked if I would consider a conversation for closure. I didn't reply to any of them. The next day, I learned that she had gone to HR to contest her termination. According to someone at the front desk, she asked to speak to the CTO directly, insisting she had been misunderstood. When they refused to let her through, she waited in the lobby for over an hour before security asked her to leave the building. By the weekend, she had started reaching out to mutual friends. Some were former co-workers, others were from my social circle, people we had both spent time with as a couple. A few of them forwarded her messages to me. Everett and I had a fight. He took it to extremes. This is all a huge miscommunication. He's trying to ruin my career. I just wanted to be heard. Some friends reached out to me directly, asking if I was okay. A couple of them admitted they didn't know what to believe at first. Margot could be persuasive, and for people who hadn't seen her behind the curtain, her version of events seemed plausible on the surface. But facts speak louder than charm, and as the truth came out, the forwarded confidential emails, the manipulative complaint draft versions, her elevation through misrepresented work, more people began to distance themselves from her story. Still, I wasn't immune to the emotional aftermath. I'd spent over a year with someone I believed I could build a life with. We talked about owning a home. Starting something small on the side together. Visiting her extended family in Montana. That version of us was gone now, and in its place was something hard to define, not just betrayal, but the slow decay of what I thought was real. Professionally, my return came with more than just a reinstatement. 2 days after I was back, the VP of engineering pulled me into his office and closed the door. I wanted you to hear this from me directly, he said. We're not just restoring your responsibilities, we're giving you a broader mandate. You're being promoted to senior systems lead. I stared at him. I hadn't even asked for it. It's not about pity, he said quickly. This is merit. And, frankly, recognition that you handled a very difficult situation with professionalism and grace. The way you documented everything, stayed composed, it helped us not only reach the right conclusion, but rethink our process for handling internal reports. The raise came with equity adjustments and a new team of specialists under my oversight. It was a bittersweet reward. I hadn't wanted to succeed because someone else had failed, but I'd also learned that life rarely offers perfect victories. The same day, a new set of guidelines was quietly released by HR, clearer standards for conflict of interest reporting, anonymous escalation routes for ethics violations, and safeguards against malicious reporting. Margot's case had reshaped internal policy, not by name, of course, but by consequence. On the personal front, I made plans to move out. Though her name was still on the lease, I didn't want to spend another night in a space she might legally access. I spoke with our landlord, explained the situation in general terms, and negotiated an early release with a small penalty fee. Within a week, I was in a furnished rental on the other side of town, small, quiet, and unburdened by memory. I left behind almost everything we had bought together. New sheets. New dishes. New rhythm. And still, the messages came. Email accounts I didn't recognize. A handwritten note tucked into the mailbox at my new address. I still don't know how she found it. One afternoon, my mother called and asked, "Who is this woman claiming to be your fiancé?" Apparently, Margot had reached out to her, saying that we were just having a rough patch and that I had misunderstood a situation she now regretted. My mother, who had only met Margot once, was unimpressed. I told her to never contact me again, she said. I changed my number that week. What hurt the most wasn't the loss of the relationship. It was the corrosion of trust, not just in her, but in myself. How could I not have seen this coming? Were there signs? Had I ignored small red flags because I wanted to believe in the idea of her more than the reality? My therapist, a soft-spoken man named Gerard with a background in conflict trauma, told me this reaction was normal. When someone violates trust so severely, he said, it's not just about what they did. It's about how they made you question your judgment. But that doesn't mean your instincts are broken. It means you were operating in good faith. I've been seeing Gerard weekly now. Slowly, the fog is lifting. 2 months passed. In the world of software development, that's enough time to ship 2 minor releases, close a dozen tickets, and forget half the bugs you swore you'd fix tomorrow. In life, though real life, it's just barely enough time to start breathing like yourself again. I hadn't seen or heard from Margot in several weeks. After the letter at my door and the attempt to contact my family, I had a formal cease and desist letter sent to her by a lawyer. It wasn't a lawsuit, just a clear message: further contact would be treated as harassment, and I was documenting everything. That letter marked the first real turning point. The constant communication attempt stopped. I didn't receive another text, email, or doorstep surprise. What I didn't expect was what came next. About 3 weeks after the letter, I received an email from a generic sender address I didn't recognize. It had no subject line, just a small attached file named foreverit.pdf. I hovered over it for a long time before opening it. I was half expecting something accusatory, a final volley, maybe even a rewritten narrative meant to justify everything that had happened. But instead, it was a written apology. A full page. Typed. Signed at the bottom. There were no excuses, no attempts to explain away her choices. Just a quiet confession. She wrote that she had started therapy. That what she'd done to me and to herself was rooted in years of connecting success to affection and fear to failure. She'd grown up in a household where praise was conditional. Where love was earned through report cards and achievements, and everything else was silence. She said she wasn't blaming her upbringing, but that she was beginning to see how it shaped her. "I've spent most of my life calculating how to be valuable enough to keep," she wrote. "I thought if I succeeded fast, if I outpaced the process, it would mean I was finally safe." At the end, she wrote, "I'm not asking for a response. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted to tell you that I see it now. I'm sorry for everything." I didn't reply. But I did read it twice. Not because I believed she had changed, but because part of moving forward meant accepting that closure doesn't always look like justice. Sometimes, closure is knowing you don't carry the weight of someone else's choices anymore. In the weeks that followed, my life slowly started to feel mine again. The company stabilized, and my new role settled into a rhythm. I was leading a new initiative focused on cross-platform scalability, the kind of work that excited me. My team trusted me more than ever, and the engineers who had seen the situation unfold had quietly become some of my fiercest allies. One of them, a young dev named Anders, stayed late one evening to ask for career advice. As I talked through architecture diagrams with him, I realized I was explaining things in the exact way I once had with Margot. For a brief second, the memory stung. But then it passed, because I understood something crucial. My willingness to share knowledge wasn't a flaw. It wasn't naive. It was a strength. The problem wasn't what I gave. It was who I gave it to. I signed a lease on a new apartment, a quiet one-bedroom and a corner unit overlooking a small park. There's a trail nearby where I run on weekends. I bought a second-hand guitar and started playing again. A few friends convinced me to join a local trivia night team. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real and it was mine. Dating wasn't something I was pursuing, not yet. A few people had tried to set me up, but I'd been honest, I needed time. I didn't want to carry old wounds into new beginnings. I wasn't scared of relationships, but I was determined to be more mindful, not cynical, just careful. The most valuable thing that came from all of this wasn't the promotion or even the vindication, it was clarity. Clarity about my values. About the kind of person I wanted to be. About how to respond when trust is shattered, and how to rebuild without bitterness. We talk a lot in this industry about systems, about architecture, about how to build things that don't fall apart under pressure. But people are systems too. They have dependencies, histories, integrations. And when something breaks, you can't always patch it. Sometimes, you have to rebuild with better code, clearer inputs, stricter permissions, cleaner logs. I used to believe trust was something you gave freely. Now I think of it more like access. Earned. Audited. Protected. Not because you expect people to fail you, but because you respect the cost of repair if they do. As for Margot, I've heard bits and pieces. Someone said she moved to Arizona and is working at a much smaller firm. I don't know if she's still in design or trying something new. I hope, for her sake, she's doing the work to change. I hope she finds her way, not because she deserves redemption, but because we all deserve the chance to grow. But her story? It's not mine to follow anymore. I keep a post-it note on my monitor now. It reads: document everything. Trust carefully. Teach generously. Move forward. It's not revenge. It's not survival. It's just how I live now. And honestly, that feels like enough. Thank you for watching the video, like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.